Three teams through week two are undefeated, and week two was a little different than week one. We did have only one game finish within single digits in week two, where more than one was super close. And again, if you remember, we had that overtime game in week one. But this is the week two post-game show. We have a loaded house of analysts here for you guys to break down all the action. My name's Joey, and let's get to week two here. And so again, we've talked about those three undefeated teams and me not being prepared at all. None of them actually face off next week. I look quickly. So that means we could be headed for the same thing, right? Kind of when they play each other, hopefully someone loses, eventually, right? So we could kind of see who's going to stay undefeated in week three. But let's talk about how those teams got there in week two. Let's start with, I think one of the better games, highlight-wise and then even score-wise, it wasn't the closest margin, but I think it was kind of the most back and forth and entertaining. Let's put it that way. And of course, I'm biased because I saw this one. But let's talk about the Air Mambas who do get their first win. They beat the Gym Rats, who did win in week one. So both of those teams, let me just, before I say it, yeah, those are the two 1-1 teams, right? So kind of flipping the script on each other heading into week two. But this game was on court one. So let's go to Wyatt first, and then I'll kind of go to Ashton. But so Wyatt, you can go any direction you'd like on that one, and I'll kind of give you stats afterwards. But it is the Air Mambas who, a tight game, and really the third quarter is kind of where they were able to pull away a little bit. But what'd you see from the Air Mambas, Wyatt, that allowed them to get their first win?
Well, you can see that the game was won within the paint. It wasn't a 3-point shootout. There was only about like four teams made for each team, 4 threes made for each team. And the game was it was a close game throughout, but they pulled away in the fourth quarter. I mean, it was a 2-point game going into the fourth quarter, and then they pulled out. I don't know. They changed a lot. They started playing a much better defense. They didn't allow as many free lanes. It was all around. They'd made some great defensive adjustments, and they just started putting stops which gave them the lead.
Yeah, and so kind of go over some stats here really quick before we get to the other close game on the other court. Mario Valerio led the way with 17, Luis Ramirez with 16 for those of you guys listening as a podcast. But if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook or Instagram, you can see our screen right now. We have the box score up there. So 3 players in double figures for the Air Mambas. And Ashton, I'll kind of put you on the spot a little bit with the Gym Rats. Ashton knows the deal. He can circle back on the Air Mambas in a second. But for the Gym Rats, their second game, I'll tell you what Brandon Whitman told me after the game. And only 13 points for him this week after the 40-point explosion last week. But for the Gym Rats, Ashton, in this one, a different game, like I talked about, kind of 2 different weeks for the Gym Rats in this one.
Seeing their game from last week to this week, last week they kind of they were coming back and then they would go back down, come back, and then they kind of still. This game they just kind of looked lost at times. There's times where they were there, they came back. In the second quarter they came back, made a 2-point game in the halftime, but then they kind of just lost momentum by the time that second half came, that fourth quarter. Once the Air Mambas kind of found that momentum to kind of let's seal the deal here. They wanted a nice run. They just kind of lost themselves and couldn't make it back into the game.
Yeah, kind of never being able to get over the hump, right? Is that expression that we hear a lot in sports. They were able to battle back, they made it close, and then never really able to take the lead and maintain it. Thomas DeAndrea for them, 23 points, 10 rebounds, so a double-double for him in his debut. We talked about Dylan Gallagher last week, and to finish my tease about Brandon Whitman, he goes, "Now everyone knows I can score. They were not letting me get to the hoop as easy this week." I'm like, well, that's what happens. We saw it in the summer, actually, Ashton, with Louis Panacchia, who went for 35 over the summer in this league. And then the next couple weeks, it was more of a struggle as teams kind of figured out, well, let's stop him and see what happens, right? And I think that it's so funny that that's what Brandon said to me after the game. He was like, they were ready for me, which that's what happens, right? After you kind of go off like that in week one. So, but he's a good player. And so that kind of leads me to, let's see what he can do in week 3, right? And that'll be kind of the tell for the season, I think, for this team, for him, and kind of how that team bounces back as they adjust to, a different style league. But the Air Mambas, again, 56% shooting to Wyatt's point, kind of playing more in the paint, getting cuts, getting dunks. and 5 threes made. And let me just talk about the rebounding. I mean, they took care of the glass 37-24 as well for the Air Mambas, right? So everything that these guys said holds true in both of those teams, now 1-1. So let's get over to court 2. The other court, let's get to the Road Dogs and unaffiliated. So I got home last night and was kind of going through the stats and kind of thinking about what happened. And it is the Road Dogs that are 2-0, right? They squeaked out that win in week 1, and you can say whatever you'd like, but a win's a win. And here they are in week 2 in a little more of a convincing fashion, in the sense of that fourth quarter, I think was when they kind of made their run. You could hear them. I thought somebody got dunked on, and it was just them putting together a little run to build a lead and kind of seal the win. We'll go to Colin first, and then Chris. I know those guys were over on that court, and we got Dan standing by as well. But Colin first on this one. I mean, the Road Dogs 2-0. Rion Watts, his first game, leads the way with 15 points. But what did the Road Dogs do especially? I mean, it says a 30-point fourth quarter for them. So let's talk about that fourth quarter and what they did to improve to 2-0.
Yeah, so I've seen both the Road Dogs games in action, and I think this one you see more of the balance once again. But this time around, Jalen and Anthony decided they contributed more than they did last game, and they in the fourth quarter, especially Eric from unaffiliated was very problematic for them in the paint. He was dominant. He's very athletic. You could tell the way he's playing, but they put on multiple bodies on him in the paint, so he wasn't getting as much rebounds. And the fourth quarter, there was 3 threes in a row that came from number 15. It was Mark. He had 3 threes in a row, which really sparked that comeback that they were looking for. They needed, because going to the third, it was a tight game, but it didn't really. It seemed like unaffiliated was there all along, but like had the lead. But those threes really put the game away.
Yeah, and before we get to Chris in a second, I mean, the Road Dogs, we talked about Rion Watts, Mark Washington finished with 13, Mesio Moreno 13, and Jalen Ardrey with 11. So those 4 scorers in double figures. But really, that third quarter, they came out of halftime, a close game, and I'm pretty sure the Road Dogs kind of got that lead to double digits really early in the third, right? And then by the fourth, like you talked about, kind of back to even. So kind of, Chris, to kind of touch on unaffiliated a little bit, you can talk about the winning team as well, but really unaffiliated in that third quarter. I mean, what were they doing well to keep the game close? And then ultimately it wasn't enough, right? But what was unaffiliated doing?
I think in the third quarter, what they were doing well was they weren't just like living and dying by the 3. I think throughout the first half, they were kind of, that's what they were doing. I think they were just taking a lot of 3-point shots, and they didn't really have a clear identity of what their team was or what their team was about. And I think at the third quarter, specifically Eric with the 21 points, and I think it was Seth as well. I think they like took charge really of the team, because even with Eric, I know he had a lot of fouls in the game. He thought he had more fouls than he really did. So I think he was playing more towards the end. I think he was playing a little more conservative. But I think once he figured out that he was the person who was gonna have to score, they turned into a more physical game. And then I think what happened again in the fourth quarter was when the lead did get back to double digits, they kind of figured we need to start taking more 3-point shots. So they were obviously at a disadvantage, where the Road Dogs could play a more physical game and kind of just completely body them in the paint.
Yeah, I love that. And Eric Fowler, 21 points, led the way, and 13 rebounds. So he was definitely impacting the game. Seth Coates with 14, and 12 of his 14 points from 3. So I know a lot of those kind of came in the fourth quarter as they were trying to kind of erase that deficit they were facing. And Antonio Martinez as well with 10 and 9 himself for unaffiliated. So yeah, I mean, I think that kind of sums this one up. And really, unaffiliated 0-2 is one of our 3 0-2 teams. So it's funny, it's still even, right? Through 2 games, 3 teams undefeated, 3 teams looking for a win, and those 2 teams that played in week 2 are both 1-1. And that means for the Road Dogs, we talked about them being 2-0, and next week they will take on the Gym Rats, who we talked about are 1-1. And for unaffiliated, taking on the Regulators, and this is called a transition here, guys. They'll take on the Regulators, who in week 2 did lose to Lob City and fall. So we'll save the best team for last, and I'm kidding, but that's my team, in case you guys haven't figured out how this show works. But Lob City does get the win, is another one of those 2-0 teams like we talked about, 83-42 over the Regulators. Let's go to Dan first on this one. We'll kind of get him to jump in on Lob City, really. I mean, Joe Secator led the way again, 29-5, Colin Burns 19-10, but Dan, I mean, a huge first quarter, and what did Lob City do well in your opinion?
They got down. It was 6-5 early on. Lob City gave up a couple of threes and then they bounced back really big. Even Joe, and they have two big names, but I think other guys can do damage as well. So keep them off the boards because they do get a lot of rebounds, and just don't let them scare you. Like stay awake on defense because they're a great team. Shoot.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. And so, yeah, Chris, I mean, really kind of touched on the Regulators really quick. If we want to talk on them, we don't have to spend too much time on, really this game, because I know it got out of hand really after that first quarter, but Chris, we'll get you back in. And Justin Titsworth, again, 3 for 15 isn't, his ideal shooting performance after what he did in week 1, but anything that stood out from you really on the Regulators and their first test against Lob City?
Man, I think they rebounded the ball pretty well compared to what they were doing in the first half. I think in the second half, they obviously the same thing, was the game was kind of decided, but they were still trying. And I think the biggest thing was that they obviously just kept their spirits up. But the fact that he kept shooting and he didn't lose spirit was nice. And he still made a couple of shots. So I think the energy of the team was still pretty good. I think it was just the same thing. The team that they might have been like out of physical, and just like the paint game killed him. I think that was a big thing of it. Just like the transition defense, another thing as well.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny, you guys haven't seen too much of Lob City. I know Ashton has. We're gonna get back to him in a second with the other the game, and Colin's gonna get in first. So get ready, Colin. I didn't forget about you. But when you talk about those things with Lob City, as far as size, right, transition, even 3-point shooting, I mean, that's what that team does well and why they are the so many time defending champs, right? So all of those things you guys touched on makes total sense. 27-6 after the first quarter, and kind of cruise from there. I talked about their leading 2 scorers. Cody Crawford gets into double digits with 10, and for the Regulators, Doug Whedon, another player who's returning this season with 13-7 of his own. 36% shooting for the Regulators from the floor and 5 for 25 from 3. When Lob City then on the other end shoots 70%, and doesn't have to take a ton of threes, it gets tricky to get stops, and come back in a game like that. Colin, I guess bigger picture, and I almost want to put you on the spot a little bit, really, as Lob City next week, they'll face off against the Owl Waves team, who is also 0-2, and we'll talk about them in a second. But I guess just your impression overall of Lob City. I know kind of last week, I think we kind of went a little more quickly on Lob City because of the expectations we have for that team. But, through 2 weeks, you've seen them at least once, right, Colin? So, just seeing, I guess, maybe their potential, or if you want to say 70% of their potential, right? Like what from this team stands out? And then really, what do you see big picture? You know what I mean? Like what just any thoughts on Lob City as they look to get another title?
So I think that Lob City, their energy is completely unmatched. I think the only other team that matches their energy would be the Road Dogs, from what I've seen. But I think if teams want to have a chance against Lob City, they might have to change up their defense to primarily focus on stopping Joseph Secator, as he is just completely outworking everyone on the court. So they have to maybe run the box to 1 with a 1 and 2 zone, or switch it up, maybe throw double teams at him just to spice things up, because he's dominating out there. He can drive to the paint, and he's also a great playmaker while also shooting the ball. He shot 4 for 7 from 3. But yeah, we didn't really see the Regulators at their full potential either, as they were missing my last week's left on player of the week. Tommy McSpartan was not there. And you did see Justin Tinsworth. He shot 3-15 from 3-point. I think that's because they're missing their point guard, and he's better shooting when he's catching and shooting rather than being their main number 1 guy point guard. So I think that game, this box score, it could have been closer if they had those two guys. But yeah, Lob City, they if they want any other teams want a shot, they have to they need to die by their second best player and not Joseph, because he is very, very good, and you just need to stop him first.
Yeah, and you know, you talk agree on all of that, and you talk about energy. Well, let's get to the team you haven't seen yet, Colin. I don't think he's seen the Halfway Crooks, but darn it, we brought the energy in week 2, baby. And I know Wyatt and Ashton will touch on that in a second, but it is the Halfway Crooks. Our last game improving to 2-0, beating the Always like we talked about. I can get you the margin here in a second. You guys would think I would prepare for things like this by 16. Really just a bigger third and fourth quarter for the Halfway Crooks in a game that was, 4-point game at halftime. And then, the Halfway Crooks kind of just kept building on their lead. Let's go to Wyatt first, because then Ashton can fill in and show you guys what it means to suck up to the host. But Wyatt, as far as the Halfway Crooks and kind of what you saw in week 2, we'll talk about, I'll pull up their box score in a second. Charles Alexander, you can start with him if you'd like. Charles Correa, we need a catchy nickname for Charles and Charles. It's like a law firm, on the Halfway Crooks, but those two led the way. Ethan had a great game, Ethan Austin as well. We'll get to the stats in a second, but Wyatt, the Halfway Crooks and what you think of them through 2 weeks.
I mean, they played a great game. There's not many teams that are going to do much against a team that puts up 97 points on 68% shooting percentage. I mean, that's just unreal. And talking about the 3 stars of the game, we got Ethan Austin, Charles Correa, and Charles Alexander. We had Ethan Austin, who shot 72% for field goal percentage, and then we had Charles Correa, who drilled 8 threes, which is unreal. That's crazy. And I mean, this game was just offensive dominance. They could not stop them.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to kind of the size thing, right? So it's so funny that a lot of the teams come in this league, and it was the gym rats who were saying this after the game as well. They were like, some teams are just bigger and it's tough to stop them. And I'm like, well, it's funny. Everybody thinks like I want to be, super athletic, and that helps, get out and run and shoot threes and dunk and have a good time. And you do have a good time. And then some teams that are bigger, like Lob City, like the Halfway Crooks can be at times. And it kind of goes back to real basketball, right? Where it's like, let's just get in the paint, let's rebound, let's block shots, let's get easy ones, and then good luck, right? And the threes kind of come off of that. And, that's kind of what happened in this game. The Always had some size, and I'll let Ashton jump in. And Wyatt did a pretty good job sucking up, I must say. So Ashton has to try to top that when it comes to the Halfway Crooks this week. But for the Always, Josh DePina, 25 and 6. Aderson Mendez with 18, Shane Patrick in his debut, 16 and 5, and Terrence Gallo with 13. So they were doing some balanced scoring. They had some bigger bodies, that's for sure, where it kind of, from my perspective, kind of working some of the subs, kept the Halfway Crooks in that bigger lineup, right? Devin Devon Pina, Charles Alexander kind of matching up with the lineup the Always was putting in. But then when Charles Correa is hitting 8 threes, it definitely has that impact. So Ashton, go wherever you like on this game. And I kind of talked about both teams a little bit, but Charles Alexander, I think, so he's a former MVP. Of course, he's going to have an impact on the game, but what you saw, even from week 1, right? Week 1 to week 2 for the Halfway Crooks, what Charles Alexander kind of added to any team he's on, but especially this Halfway Crooks team.
So this season, kind of I've seen the Halfway Crooks play the last 2 seasons. I definitely say this is definitely the best team I've seen. Charles Alexander just pushes them higher. Last week it did seem like you guys are missing him. I felt like if you had him last week, that game was not close at all. It was a 1-point game last week, and then this week. But I think this was a pretty even matchup size-wise. But I think the Halfway Crooks was definitely way more athletic, especially adding Charles Alexander, and then now Correa hitting threes. If he does that, if he keeps doing that duo is gonna be lethal. And if Ethan just keeps being himself, this team has a chance to win it all and dethroning Lob City.
Well, just put the target on our back. Dang it, right? Thanks, Ashton. That's not what I meant. That's the opposite of what I was saying to do. But everybody else, get ready. We have one more question we're going to do before we get out of here, and I'll surprise you with it. It's going to be great. It's going to be a blast. But for the halfway crooks, I mean, any team, right, that goes from not having Charles Alexander 1 week to then having Charles Alexander on the court, yeah, you're going to see an impact, and it's just that athleticism, that size, the matchups. Yeah, should be a fun time. I don't know if it's I mean, well, I'm going to make Dom Langston upset, and that's never my goal, who was on the halfway crooks over the summer. I think it would be it's very close, the team we had over the summer and this team, and I think the team over the summer is meshed more quickly, where this team, we're still trying to figure stuff out, and I think that is the difference right now. So we'll see. I mean, last year the halfway crooks were in the finals and, came up short to Lob City. So that's a tall order for a team to repeat again. And Lob City's like, yeah, we'll repeat. It's not that big of a job for us. So we'll take care of that if you guys would like. So I appreciate that. Everybody else can take notes on how to suck up, and don't ever actually suck up. Ashton did a pretty good job. But next week, it will be the halfway crooks and the Air Mambas. So a good game of two returning teams. I'm interested to see that one. And we talked about Lob City and All Waves next week, unaffiliated in the regulators. So 2 0-2 teams. We love it. So somebody's getting their first win next week. And then we talked about the Gym Rats and the Road Dogs. All right. For this one, let's come up with a good question and put you guys on the spot. We did a player last week. I'd rather talk about players than teams. You just talked about a ton of teams. So, yeah, week 2 player, okay, that had the biggest impact on the game. So we talked about a lot of them. Challenge yourself. Try to do one we haven't talked about. I'm going to Ashton first, which will give everyone else a little more time to kind of think about it. You have plenty of time, I promise, okay? So Ashton, from any game, I know you kind of watched them all with me today. What player do you think had the biggest impact? Not stat-wise, right? But like watching the game was like, oh yeah, he got off the bus today. That's my favorite line. Is like, some star players, right? They're star players and we're ready for him. And then it's like, did he get off the bus? Was he at the game? Did he miss the game? Like was he even there today? And they still put up stats, but it's like, did he impact the game? Right? So Ashton, what player impacted the game for you?
This player is also on your team. It's Devin Pena. I do love Devin Pena. He's a great guy. Normally, you kind of see him in that 20 points, double-double, but he had 15 points. He had 10 rebounds. His presence definitely was felt in that paint, especially when you're playing a guy like Shane Patrick, who's another big center. He's like 6'4", and he can dominate the paint. But Devin can definitely hold his size, and he was doing everything on the defense, and he was helping out the halfway crooks throughout the whole game. And he did have a nice highlight play in the beginning of the game where he stole the ball and ended up leading to a dunk on the other end. I think if he keeps stepping this up, this defense is going to get way better and way better. He's definitely the vocal on that defense.
Yeah, and I think that's the perfect example, right? So not necessarily a top scorer, but his impact. And I think, the way he can impact a game is important for this team with his size and actually taking advantage of that. Because if Charles Correa is going to hit 8 threes, we don't need anyone else shooting threes. No offense. You know what I mean? Like, obviously I will, and Jared will, as I'll put myself in the, very good shooter category. But, we don't need everyone doing that, right? Let's get inside and kind of take advantage of that matchup, which he did in week 2. All right. Colin was stretching, which is totally okay because no one can see you, but he's next. That's what that means. If you're doing that, you're ready. So, Colin, what player had the biggest impact for you?
I think that I'm gonna have to go with Eric Fowler of Unaffiliated. Although they did lose to the Road Dogs, he really made Road Dogs change their whole entire defense focus around him. And I think without Eric, I think Unaffiliated would not have been close. He shot 9 of 10 from the field while also having 13 rebounds. His build, he's pretty big and he's tall, but he also can shoot the 3, but he knows his role. He shot 1 of 2 from 3. He only took 2 threes. But his presence in the paint was unmatched. And in the first half, Road Dogs really had no answer for him, even though they are very physical. But towards the second half, they had to start doubling him for rebounds just because he's that big and physical. And I think without them, it would have been a real struggle for Unaffiliated.
Yeah, and his first game in the league this week, right? And has that kind of impact. So shout out Eric Fowler. I love it. All right. Who wants it? Chris? Chris is up. We're doing it. We'll save Wyatt for last. All right, Chris, who you got?
So for the Road Dogs, I went with number 11, Jalen Ardrey. he put up a respectable. He still put up 11 points, and he had 71 field goal percentage. He only missed 2 shots. But I think the biggest thing that I saw from Jalen as to why I think he was probably one of the better ones is he played most of the game with 5 fouls, but he was still out there. He was still trying his hardest. I think that was the biggest thing because the Road Dogs, an unaffiliated game for the first 3 quarters, was probably the closest game, if not one of the more. I think he was just had a good energy for his team, and he was saying to them, even if I have 5 fouls, I'm still gonna obviously try as hard as I can. I'm not gonna like pressure off the ball. I'm still gonna play like man on man defense. So I think that was just the biggest thing. I think the team in general had a good energy, but I think he was one of the best people to try and bring everybody up.
Yeah, kind of added that energy for them, right? And especially noticeable in that fourth quarter where that's impressive with the 5 fouls. That's for sure. Like it's a fine line, right? Because you're important to the team and you don't want to foul out, but you can't, just stand there, right? That doesn't do any good either. You might as well foul out at that point. So, yeah, very nice. All right, Wyatt, who you got?
All right, so I got Luis Ramirez from the Air Mambas. He put up a great game. He had a double-double. He had 16 points, shot 80%. He had 10 rebounds to go along with that. I mean, when you put up a double-double in these fast-paced games, I mean, that's just impressive. And it's going to take a lot to stop someone who's doing that on such a well-balanced team, too.
Yeah, and just from watching that game, I mean, he was kind of the one who figured out, all right, let me see where Thomas DeAndrea is, who is the biggest guy that the Gym Rats has, right? And if we can pull him away from the basket, which is it's much more spread out 4-on-4, right? So all right, if he's not in the paint, this is my time. Like no one else is really able to stop me if he drives to the basket. And I think it was pretty clear he figured that out in the second half and took advantage, right? And definitely helped them get the win. Luis Ramirez, 16 points, 8 for 10 and 10 rebounds. So like you said, huge impact for the Air Mambas. Guys, all right. Close to a half hour, killing it. Love it. Touched on everything for week 2 and week 3 on Tuesday night. We talked about those matchups, but we'll see if we still have 3 undefeated teams coming out of week 3. Somebody gets upset, and we'll go from there. But we do know someone's getting their first win next week, which is always good stuff. That's what we like. That's what we like to see. So for Colin, Chris, Ashton, Wyatt, I'm Joey. Thanks for watching. We have top plays coming up. I know Wyatt's helping us with that this week, so I'm pumped about that. We're going to figure out that order in a second. We got power rankings coming. I know Colin's working on those, so we love that. Chris did them last week, so Chris had the easy job after the first week. I mean, now is the good stuff. You get a couple, games from each team in there. And yeah, stay tuned for more content as well. And as we get ready for week 3. So everybody, thanks for watching. Good job. And we'll see you at week 3.